Ever noticed how when someone dies, there's suddenly this unspoken rule that comes into play that you can't say anything bad about the dead? When someone in your life dies, someone who you really didn't like, it can bring up many different feelings. While those who have never been in this situation will say, "Yay, the person's dead, time to celebrate," it's much more complicated than that. And often it's not just the emotions that it brings up, but the practicalities of the funeral, the will, distributing possessions, and having family and friends all in one space. So today, let's talk about the death of someone you hate. Emotions. At the best of times, grief can make you feel many different emotions at once. But when someone toxic in your life dies, well, that's a whole new web of emotions. In this situation, it's not uncommon to feel relief, guilt, regret. It's also not uncommon to feel grief, or to feel nothing at all. Additionally, you may be caught off guard by the fact that their death doesn't suddenly resolve the issues that you had. It doesn't bring closure. Or you realize that you had secretly wished that the relationship would resolve and get better. Let yourself feel what you are feeling. There's no right or wrong way to feel in this situation. Sometimes you won't be able to talk to those around you about how you're feeling, but there are plenty of hotlines and therapists out there willing and ready to listen. Also, for the love of God, do not make any major decisions in the middle of this emotional cluster. Disenfranchised grief. Say you came from an abusive family and now you're married with kids of your own. You've told your partner all about your family, and while you never wanted to be near them and you despise them, you were in contact with them so your kids could see their grandparents. But then your parents die, which affects you. You may feel relief, but you also feel sadness and guilt, and your partner doesn't understand. They say, "You should be happy that they're finally gone." And then they get annoyed that you're grieving for these people that you'd said so many times that you hated. This is disenfranchised grief, where your grief is not validated. When others tell you you shouldn't be feeling grief and sadness over those who have died for whatever reason. Now, this is just one example. Grief is complicated, and humans are complicated. Everyone's different opinion of the deceased. Let's say that your ex-partner of 20 years, who you had 2 children with, dies in a fiery car crash. Now, you're thinking, well, that's karma, and you're fine. That's great. But your children have just lost a parent. Your ex-in-laws have lost a child. Their mates have lost a friend. As we said earlier, there's no right or wrong way to feel in this situation, but there is a right or wrong way to act in this situation, and invalidating others' feelings is the wrong way. Even if there's no love lost between yourself and the deceased, others will probably be affected by the death. The bereaved deserve their chance to say goodbye and grieve in their own way. But if you didn't get along with the person, you might not be included in mourning activities or conversations. This can lead to feelings of exclusion, isolation, and resentment. In cases such as this, you might have to grieve separately from others in order to respect each other's boundaries and needs. Funeral planning. In many cultures, funeral planning is done by the community, and this lessens the burden that it can have at such a time. But for most of us, here in Australia, that's not our culture, and the immediate family, no matter what, is expected to put the funeral together for everyone else. This becomes problematic when the dead person is not particularly liked by yourself, and quite frankly, you would prefer a direct cremation to just get rid of them, particularly if you have to pay for it. There's no easy answer to this, but keep in mind those around you can always organise a memorial service to come together and grieve if they wish. The body doesn't need to be there. And if there were others that were quite close to the deceased and they want a funeral with the body and they're willing to pay, let them do so. Universally despised person. While it is rare that everyone will have a negative view of someone, sometimes someone just brings that out in everyone. Remember, there is no law saying that you must have a funeral. And depending on your culture, it could be argued that funerals are more for the living than the dead anyway. So if there was no one willing to mourn the dead, then you don't really need a funeral. I mention this because in many ways it's ingrained in us that that's just how it's done. Death, funeral, burial, or cremation. Like there's no other way. As we said in our affordable funeral options video, there are various options out there that may be very useful in this situation. Our society likes to paint grief and mourning as a dignified yet simple experience. But in reality, it rarely is. Not everyone is liked, and quite frankly, some people deserve to be hated. It may not be a universal feeling with all those around them, but for those who do feel negatively towards the deceased, their death can be a very conflicting time. Everyone grieves differently and for different reasons, so keep that in mind. Now go talk death.